Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're excited to share with you that we have 2 upcoming Level 2 NARM therapist trainings beginning in May and in June. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for either of these NARM therapist trainings. One training will take place in Austin, Texas, and the other training will take place live and online. This Level 2 training is designed to support mental health professionals who work with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Being trained in NARM, one of the first clinical models specifically designed to address ACEs and CPTSD, supports therapists to learn how to address the long-term impacts of adverse childhood experiences and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If you're interested in this training, we encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. For more information about both upcoming trainings, please visit narmtraining.com/level 2. We look forward to you joining our growing international NARM community and are inspired to work with you to bring NARM to your clients and communities in order to transform trauma. And now for our interview. In 1974, Judge Abby Abinati became the first Native American woman admitted to the State Bar of California. She was appointed to the San Francisco bench over 2 decades ago and has specialized in family court and juvenile dependency. She has also served as a judge or magistrate for 4 other Western tribes. Since 2007, Judge Abby has been a Yurok Tribal Court Chief Judge in Klamath, California. In our conversation today, she talks about the innovative and trauma-informed work she and her colleagues are doing in both the courtroom and through programs for the community members that are dealing with the impacts of trauma. Judge Abby often presides over what is called a wellness court, which offers a healing path for nonviolent offenders struggling with substance abuse. Please enjoy this conversation with Judge Abby Abinati. All right, we are here with Abby Abinati. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Abby.
Thank you.
And should I call you Judge Abby? Is that how you like to be referred to?
That's fine.
Great. Well, I wonder if we could just dive right in. And we usually start these conversations with the question of what would you like listeners to get out of our conversation today?
I guess I would like them to develop their own way of thinking and problem solving using some of the benchmarks that we discuss, because I think it will be helpful for the people that they're working with. Give them a broader context.
Okay, great. Can we start first by just hearing a little bit about the work that you're doing? That would be really interesting to me if I could hear from you.
Sure. I'm the Chief Judge of the Yurok Tribe. We're the largest surviving tribe in California. We have created an infrastructure, a judicial system from the ground up that reflects our culture. I spent a number of years as a lawyer and as a judge in the state system before coming home, and had sort of a daily example of what's not working. And I felt like it was not something I wanted to transplant. We were organized after 1993, so we had a chance to build from that point. And we decided that what we were going to do is create a judicial system that was based on our value system, not on the system that I had been working in. And our value system is not rights-based, it's responsibility-based. So that changes how you do everything. So you have essentially this value system here, you have an invasion, and now we're over here. And so what we're trying to do is create practices that are consistent with pre-invasion values, but deal with today's problems. Because any culture would have evolved. We just had this very catastrophic invasion, which gave us a lot of problems, frankly. So we have to be very mindful of that. And so we now have an infrastructure. Currently, I think we have about 55 employees. And primarily what they do is outreach to community members who are having issues in community, including with the state system or federal system. And we try to create an ability for them to reassume their responsibilities and go forward. And things like, if you did something wrong, it's not my obligation to prove you did it wrong or that you didn't. You just tell me whether you did or you didn't. And if you did something wrong, then we help you make it right. That's our job. And so you can walk out, with your head held up, because humans have a tendency to make mistakes. It's just our nature. you have to work with that. And a lot of what we do is, we have a cultural officer,
Right.
we have elders feeding programs, we have youth programs, and most of our courts are what you call wellness courts, and you're in court every 2 weeks. And the reason that you're in court every 2 weeks is so that you can meet with your team and see if you need something different than what we're giving you. Do you need help getting a job? Did you lose your house? Is somebody in your family sick? Did you get enough fish, for the winter? Did you, all of those things. There's many, many things that you do in a village that you don't really see done in a city, for instance.
Yeah, I've read a little bit and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's something I've been so curious after reading about the work that you're doing. And you touched on the difference between using a value system as opposed to being really different from a rights based system. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like?
Everything from, when I first came home, people would say, "Oh, you can't be the judge because you know Emily." And I'm like, "Of course I know Emily. We all grew up together." Well, I don't know. She didn't grow up with me because she's obviously much younger. But, I said, "You guys have watched entirely too much TV. That is not how this works. We are village people. We had issues and we resolved them in village. And we didn't run up and down the river looking for a stranger to help us do that. We figured it out. That's what we're going to go back to because that's who we are."
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." And then they would move off, into the other area. And it's the whole thing about, you have a right to remain silent, those kinds of things. No, you don't. You live in this community. Your responsibility is to you, to your family, and to the community. If you did something wrong, then you need to make it right because we all know if you did it. It's not like it's a huge secret.
Yeah.
If you didn't get your nets out by the time the law says your nets should be out of the river, it's not like I don't know it within 10 minutes, because I do, because I live right above the river. If nothing else, I can walk out on my porch. So it just changes how everything is, and if we've agreed that nets come out of the river at this time, then get your net out of the river. And if you didn't, tell me why you didn't, and then we'll work it out. I had 2 young men in, and they both had their nets in too long. And I said to the first one, "Why did you, have your net in too long?" And he said, "Because I forgot to charge my cell phone so my alarm didn't go off." I said, "Okay, so you're just dumb." And I turned to the other one and I said, "Why didn't you get your net out?" And he said, "Because my cousin was supposed to run down and help Auntie get her net out, and we couldn't find him. Well, he was asleep because he didn't charge his cell phone." I said, "Okay, so your dumb cousin got you in trouble. You had to go do what was right and help your aunt before you helped yourself. So you get your net and your fish back. No harm, no foul. No matter what the law says, he went above the law, but he was right to do that." So then I turned to the first one and I said, "Okay, knucklehead, what are you going to do?" I said, essentially that's a couple $100 worth of fines. He said, I said, "Do you have the money?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, I know there's a dance this weekend. Would you bring fish to the dance? Because fish are expensive." He said, "Yeah, I would do that." And I said, "Okay, let's do this. I'll give you your nets back if you give me your word to take fish to the dance." And he said, "Well, how will you know if I do it?" I said, "1, I will be there. And 2, if you don't, you're going to have a really lousy Monday. And you look like a man who wants a really lousy Monday." He said, "Well, I was going to do it. I was just wondering." I said, "Okay, well, now we're all at peace." And I said, and if your cousin head slaps you, I'm not even going to cite him for that."
Yeah.
He said, "Okay, okay." I said, "Is it so hard to remember to charge your cell phone?" So you guys get out of here. All right. And so that was it. So it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm just really hearing that you're supporting folks and maintaining their dignity. It's like, there's a problem, let's just solve it.
Well, it's not like they didn't know that they had done it.
That's what I'm hearing.
And it's like, how do we make this right?
Right.
And by taking fish, then he can stand up,
Mhm.
in community. He did something good. He didn't, he left his net in too long, but he fixed it.
Yeah.
He took care of it, and now we're done with that.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate you just exploring that a little bit more with me because it's nice to hear the kinds of examples so, we understand the context. You talked a little bit about the invasion. Can you talk a little bit about the trauma and how you hold your community and, what everyone's been through and how that's affecting everyone now?
Well, we essentially lived here for thousands of years, and the invasion came, and it was brutal, in many aspects. And a lot of people got hurt, got killed, and a lot of the place that we were responsible for was ravaged. The rivers, the trees, everything, and it changes how you operate. And the way we survived that was we are blessed with having geography that's really hard to negotiate. To this day, on the eastern end of this reservation, we do not have electricity yet. We're hoping to get it. We don't have roads all the way. So you're talking
Oh, sure.
really rural. Well, and there's so many things that happen. We always managed fishing. We managed the river. We did things because we were together in a family. We don't consider the river to be the river. We consider it to be part of the family, and that's sort of what the court is now. I try to train our people to react and act as if they're a member of everyone's extended family. What are we going to do? How are we going to be with them to help them through this? Because everybody needs help. Everybody makes mistakes. And the invasion left us. And one of the things, about trauma is, and I think that people have to look at, they look at current behavior. Well, current behavior doesn't really, in my mind, it can create current and additional trauma. But I look at context. And for us, the context is at the time of the invasion and afterwards, we had a number of massacres. There were more massacres in California than anywhere. And many of those massacres, frankly, happened at cultural events, because if you want to kill a lot of people, go to a place where they're all congregating and not armed, because that obviously gives you an advantage.
Yeah.
If that's what you're into. I'm not saying that you are, but I'm just saying if you were inclined. Then you had the indentured slaves. California, although they said they came in as a non-slave state, had on the books slave legislation for Indians, and they were indentured slaves. And most of those slaves came from the north, came from our tribes, from the tribes up here. And then the third thing were the boarding schools. All of those events created huge trauma and traumatic behavior, and they weren't but a few generations ago, And then you had, what's the fallout from indentured slaves? What's the fallout from the schools? What's the fallout from the massacres? And that behavior trickles down, because humans, like any other animal, carry with them what has been, and then they create more trauma, which people look at as if that's the problem. I mean, it's not acceptable.
It's not where it originated.
It's not where the problem came from. No, and I think, like, we created a battery intervention program. We have the only state-certified battery intervention program. And the first lessons in that program, it's a 52-week program if you get caught up in DV in the state. And the first study module is go interview the oldest people in your family and find out where violence came into your family. Because we are not a culture that supported violence ever.
Yeah.
In thousands of years, this is not who you were. So how in the heck did we get there? And you need to know, because, a lot of these people wake up, they don't know why they behave the way they do, in truth. Or they'll say, they made me do it. I'm like, I beg your pardon, they didn't even come up to your waist. Why'd you clobber them? So you need to know where it came from if you're doing the behavior. It was stunning to them, because of our elders, like many elders in many cultures, just didn't talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want it to be out there. And you think you're just doing something. Right. You don't realize that behavior came from something else. I mean, I can use myself as an example. In my early or late teens, I walked in on my mom and her two sisters having a conversation. My mom was the youngest, and they were saying, how come you were such a baby? If you'd stayed in your own dorm at night and not crawled into ours, we wouldn't have gotten so much trouble. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And I was a big mama's girl. I was at home all the time. They had been to boarding school, and not one of them had ever said a word about it, And they basically, as three, turned their heads and said, we're not talking to you. That's all I know about their boarding school experience, And then I realized I lived at home mostly, although my mother had a lot of serious problems. I would always run back there. I hardly ever went to school, and she had a horrible time. She didn't want me bullied. She didn't want me unhappy. So she let me stay home. That was her response to it. And I literally would miss 2 or 3 months of school a year, if not more. And that. So don't pattern your school behavior after me. Then I grow up and I have a kid, and I'm traveling, and I take her with me. I never leave her.
Interesting.
And about halfway through kindergarten, I went, what are you doing? What in the world are you thinking here?
Yeah.
And I realized that's where I got it. From that whole sequence of events. Because it's not like I don't believe in education. If I hadn't stopped myself there and seen that, then I would have recreated that whole thing.
Well, and I was thinking it was your words, maybe it was someone else's words, but how that was like a protection, that your mother was likely protecting you from what she had experienced in her school experience.
Mm-hmm.
So allowing you to stay home was actually a protective action in her experience.
Yeah, because she didn't know how to fight for me. She went to the school once. I remember in the 6th grade when the teacher, who was a total racist and had been on me the entire sixth grade was going to hold me back for another year. And that's the only time she actually dressed up and went into the school. And I passed. I don't know what she did or said.
But she was able to advocate for you.
That was the only time she could do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. It just kind of puts you from a different angle of how we're looking at trauma and generational trauma. When you start realizing, like you said, the behavior, that's not where it started. That wasn't the origin. So how can we
Yeah.
take a look at where things really got going?
And I think that's what we really miss in trauma is the context.
Yeah.
You know, people, because it's a way to blame the person who's acting out. You know, you can blame me for not letting my kid be in school, but that wouldn't have really solved it,
Right.
frankly, or given me the answer of, you know, why am I doing this? You know, so, and humans like whys because it helps you then negotiate with yourself about what to do, you know, or to say, look, it's going to stop here. We're done with this now. You know, we're done with this.
Yeah.
You know, and what people will say. And I mean, that whole DV program, when we started it, we did it because one of the things they don't track is when you arrest people, they don't ask them what tribe they're in. So you have to manually look at all the arrest records, which is one of the things I do every day. But after we got this program going, we got a bunch of people in it, and they were still going to jail because they weren't doing their homework and stuff. And I was like, how can that be? Because I thought this was the answer to, you know, changing how we did it. And so I said, I'm going to spend this weekend, I'm going to figure it out. So I spent the whole weekend looking at each one and looking at each person. And a Saturday afternoon, I called my probation officer. And I said, you go up there tomorrow morning and ask those knuckleheads if they can read and write. She said, what do you mean? I said, I think they're not doing their homework because they can't read and write and they're too embarrassed to say it. And she said, you're kidding me. I said, trust me. I grew up with these guys. I know they can't read and write. And she went up there and she came back and she said, you're right.
Wow.
They'd rather go to jail than say they can't read and write. We have the highest dropout rate in elementary school of any race. And I'm like, okay. I said, you go back up there and tell them I'm going to slap them all. And then I can be in jail with them and we can have the classes together. So we, you know, I can read and write, but I can't use my phone, but they could all dictate. So we taught them how to do their homework by dictation and stuff.
Wow.
But it's just like,
Yeah.
you know, just that simple thing.
Yeah.
And you go, you know, so they're going to jail because they won't. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I mean, you knuckleheads. You're driving me nuts. You know, I have such gray hair. Actually, I'm old now, but.
But I love what I'm hearing is that your heart was in it. You really cared. You wanted to figure out what's going on here. Like, what's underneath this? Because this isn't making sense.
Yeah.
And it took some extra work on your part.
Well, it's part of it is, you know, that you have to think outside the way you've been taught in school.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that a lot of people come home, you know, or law school or whatever. I mean, it's a good thing. I want our people to be educated. And we push our people to be educated. And we work really hard. And we give release time for our people who work here to go back to school. But you have to also understand they think differently, they act differently, and their knowledge base is very narrow. And I don't want you getting locked into that. I want you to be able to be successful and do this, but you have to understand their limitations, you know. And that's what I say now, you know, it's about like this place. It's, you know, we survived because we ran and hid, and that worked then, and I'm not criticizing it, but it will not work now. We need to come back and help these people learn how to live in this environment. We lived here for thousands of years. They've lived here for a couple hundred years, and they are wrecking the joint.
Yeah.
And if we don't come back out here and help them, this time running and hiding won't help us because they will take us all out with them. So we need to help them learn how to be humans in this place.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I'm just thinking about what you just said, and my mind is kind of going back to my original curiosity of how you got into this field. So you told us a little bit about your background. And so I'm wondering what brought you to this field and what kind of got you looking at it from this different angle and so really seeing the trauma as part of the equation.
Well, I think I grew up in it, in the trauma. You know, I was, like I said, a horrible student. I got college and law school by accident, in truth. Well, in high school, I was in special needs classes until somebody came along and said, one of the women teachers who was married to the journalism teacher said, she doesn't belong in here. She's just hiding out in here. And they took me out and put me in the journalism class. And then as a graduation surprise, they gave me a scholarship for college because I wasn't going to go to college. It was only a few $100s, but they just made it up. And then because the university was new in town, one of the concessions they had made was that any kid who graduated from high school was automatically admitted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was admitted. And I could work my way through college, and I did, and people helped me. And by then, I had been taken in by by a large family on the reservation. Getting my behaviors kind of under control. And then came time to graduate from college. These old ladies called me in, Indian ladies, talking to me. We were going to go to dinner. That was it. And then said, "Wouldn't it be nice to go to law school?" I said, "Why would I want to go to law school?" And they're like, "Oh no, we think it'd be really nice." I said, "Well, then you go." They said, "No, you don't understand. There is a scholarship. You can go for free. You're the only one graduating, and you're going." I said, "No, I'm not." They said, "Yes, you are." And that was one of the many lessons you have, and don't argue with old Indian ladies because you just lose. Guess how embarrassing that is. So I trotted off to law school.
Wow. I'm curious, did they talk at all about what they saw in you? I mean, because why law school?
Well, they said, I said, I'm going to be a journalist. They said, "No, you're not. We need a lawyer more than we need a journalist." like,
Okay.
like, that's not my problem. Well, apparently it was. So, who knew?
It became your problem.
And as you watch and you see how people problem solve, I was used to that kind of problem solving, and I just would have it over here, and then I would do this, and you have the law, and you go, you have to think your way through it. And so I've always been able to do that, and it's looking at the systemic part of it, and looking at what do you do, how did you get in this place, what happened to your family, all the trauma that's in your own family, and when you look at it and you go, okay, their response to it wasn't really good. It really wasn't. It didn't help. So you can look at it and go, I think we should do it in a different way. And I went on, I did a lot of different things. I worked in a lot of different areas. I worked in courts and, across the state. And you just see they want to punish people and they want to create consequences. And I've never really seen people consequenced into good behavior without something else. It just doesn't work. I mean, you can beat somebody if you want and get something, but I don't know if that's really what you want.
Right. If we're looking at what's really effective, how can we really support the system in becoming better and these folks making different choices?
Well, and people do what they know and learn, and
Yeah.
are there some people who are maybe broken beyond what you can fix and need to be isolated? Yeah. But there's not a lot of them, but there are some. And if you recognize those, and then you have to care for them, just like you would any wild beast, and sometimes they get out of hand.
Yeah. But I wonder if there's any stories or, folks that you can think of that you've worked with in the system in this way, because I'm really hearing that what you do is so different from your typical court situation. I mean, one thing I read is that you sit down at a table
Oh, yeah.
with everyone, that you're not up on the bench, that it's like you're all equals. I mean, that really struck me. Even just reading that, my heart was tender. Like, you really understand how to be with people in a way that is going to support the goals that you have, with them.
These are our goals, our collective goals of who we are as Yuroks, and we live next to each other. They bring me fish, they bring me wood, they check on me. They have those values. I mean, I started a used bookstore because we don't have books here. And like I was unloading books one day and this car screeched right next to me and this boy jumped out and his sister had basically said, "Go take those boxes." I didn't know who they were. I mean, I knew eventually because I said, "Who's your mom?" But, I mean, it's just so different in that way, because I had just before that been in San Francisco and I saw this little old lady and she was trying to get a cab and all these people were walking past her. And I was in Starbucks and I went out there and I was like, "What's wrong with these people?" So I said, "Sit down, Auntie." I mean, she wasn't even tall enough for the cabs to see her. I got her a cab. I put all her stuff in the cab and I sent her on her way. It's just like, it's just a different way of being. You just can't act like that. It's not who we are. And as far as problem solving, I mean, I had two guys that I issued restraining orders against because they had been in a fist fight, a horrible fist fight on the river. And there was this, so I issued the restraining order. I brought them into court. And I said, "I'm really unhappy with both of you that you would do this. You've been fishing next to each other for decades." I said, "Now, I don't know what the dispute was over." I said, "But I happen to have a cultural leader here with me today one of the men from the dances, and you guys can go outside and resolve this as you should have, or come back in here and face one really mad old Yurok woman. Now you choose. We'll go talk to him. Okay. So about an hour and a half later, I hear him laughing and talking. They're knocking on the door, and I open the door. Don't worry, Judge. We got it all taken care of. It's okay now. And I said, we're done with the restraining orders. And they said, oh, yeah, that's okay. We fixed it. And so I said, okay, we're going back on the record. I dismissed the restraining order. I said, and you were ordered to go tell every one of your children and their cousins how you resolve this, because I don't want to see anybody back here ever again over something this stupid, because it just aggravates me. Okay, Judge, okay. And so that was the end of it. I never saw him again.
And there's something that I wanna highlight that you did there is that you stopped it there from spreading throughout the family lines.
Oh,
I mean, it's like you're addressing the generational part of it right there.
yeah, because I don't want it, and it's the same thing with people,
Right.
in our wellness courts. I've dealt with a lot of people, and I just stop and I talk to them. And I had this one guy who was killed in a river accident this last year, but we worked with him for probably almost a decade. And we were at this meeting after he graduated from wellness, and the meeting was about fishing stuff, and then people were yelling, and he got really aggravated, and he started to yell, and you could see the police just moving in on him. So I walked over to him, and I grabbed him by the front of his shirt, and I said, what do you think you're doing? And the police were like, oh my God, and I drug him out of there. And I said, he is not going to hurt me. And the last person in the world he's going to hurt me. That's going to hurt me. And I just gave him a tongue lashing. I said, you have scared the holy hell out of every white person within 500 miles of here. Do you really think that's smart? Because he's a huge guy. And I just laid into him. I said, now your choices are, you can go back in there and act right. You can go home. Those are your choices. Make one. Okay. I'll be all right, Judge Abby. I'll be all right. Don't worry about it. I said, yeah, that's right. I do not want to worry about it. So he walked back in and he was perfectly fine. So it's just a matter of you have to remind them, I said, you know better than that. You weren't raised to be like this, and don't do it.
Mm.
But he'd been involved since he was 8 years old. And when I got him, he was on his third strike. So he had a lot of behaviors that were not good in community. So you're bound to have some lapses now and then. So even though he wasn't in my court at that moment, it was still my responsibility to go in there and go. And that's what I train our advocates to do, is do what an aunt or an uncle would do in a situation like that. You would never let your nephew behave like that in public.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah, and I'm just hearing the way that you show up really just encourages them to rise up to what they're capable of.
Well, what they know is right.
Yeah, and what they know is right.
Because you can forget, and you can, and you've learned these other behaviors, but you have to put them away.
Yeah.
And give them a chance to react and to do what's right.
Mhm. Can you talk a little bit about, because I've heard you say, we're a community and we take care of each other. And in this situation, I would do anything, with this person that an auntie or an uncle would do. And that there's this kind of relationship. I'm wondering if the real foundation there is the values that were already there as a tribe. Are you just accessing that, or do you think this could work in a larger scope?
I think, those were our values. We were village people.
Right.
And what I said about this country as a whole is that we allowed ourselves to make an early, huge mistake, which was the melting pot mistake.
Yeah.
You come here, you throw your culture in this pot, and we'll give you a new culture that has no history. Because most of the people who came here weren't like they are now.
Right.
They had real cultures, and they would not have acted like this a couple of generations before that. I said, most of the people that came here were running, were drugged, were whatever, were poor, but they had culturals, and then they got this new culture. It's grab everything you can. It's, and that became their culture. Because one of the judges here asked me, would you take a couple of people for me? Because our domestic violence program is having a problem. I said, sure. So we took a couple of them. And so they happened to be Irish. And I said, you guys have to do the same thing. You have to find out. I said, because I know enough about your culture to know that you guys weren't always like this. So you go back and ask the oldest people you know here or in Ireland these questions. And where did violence come in? And I said, the example is the boarding schools. Where did the boarding schools come from? It's what the Brits used to crush the Celts.
Yeah.
I said, so, and they're like, what? And I said, yeah. I said, this is not who you are. This is who you've become, but you have a choice. So make it. And I think that we have to, as a country, look back at that. And this whole thing of coming back out and trying to be in partner with our local communities is a lot about that. We're speaking to their older values. These are not things that they don't know anything about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really hearing the importance of agency there, that you're showing them their choices.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even just in the interaction that you shared with the gentleman, the tall gentleman, you're saying, "These are your 2 choices. You can go in and act right, or you can go home.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to choose?" And how important that is for folks to feel that they have those choices, and you're reminding them of that. That's great. I wondered if there was, anything that you've specific that you can think of that you learned because, you're talking about trauma. Is there anything else that you've learned about trauma in this process as you work with folks? And kind of as you've seen this community healing? I mean, that's really what I'm hearing is that
Mm-hmm.
there's like healing going on, and I wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to share about that.
Well, I think, when you've gone through really hard times and you can share that, there is a way to make the pain lessen, and to go, okay, what's another way out of this pain? Maybe helping somebody else, maybe doing a kindness today, maybe going out on the river and teaching boys who never learned how to fish, because I did before they got me, I did know how to do that. And these boys now, they don't know how, so I could teach them, I could give them this gift, and so that's what we're doing more of. So it's really, how do you come back and how do you make that grow? Our cultural program, we're taking a story, we fund it, we go to an elementary school and ask, do you want this project? And the project is a father and his young son go into the elementary school and tell a story. And the story is about responsibility. The story is, little bird has broken his wing and can't fly with his family and needs a place to go for the winter. And little bird has to ask all these different trees if he can stay. And then the responses of the trees, how do you ask for help? How do you react when you don't get it? And how do you keep asking?
Mm.
And then what happens to the people who don't give you the help? And that's the story. And they tell the story, and then we partnered with a local theater group, and they come in and they make a puppet show, and the puppet show is for the whole school. And then they make the show for the parents in the school, and we provide a meal, because we want them to know how to ask for help. It's your responsibility, what you do when you don't get it, and then how do you move forward? And even here, like the bird needed the help, but every time before he asked, he gave a song to each tree, because you still have something that you could give and offer.
Oh, that is beautiful. I got chills just now as you were sharing that. Is that a traditional story from the tribe?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because what we're trying to do is, I said, we need to spread our value system.
Yeah.
And so this is a way to do it, by making this as a present to the school, to all the kids in the school, not just Yurok children. And so I have a cultural officer who goes out and, does things like that. That's what her job is.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just getting excited as I think about, how this can spread and how important the work is that you're doing and how you're modeling for so many of us how we can do it differently in our communities because it might look different, right? With
Mm-hmm.
with the culture being different in different areas, but that we could really
Sure.
kind of use this idea as a template of like accessing, okay, what are the values of our culture going back and how can we reintroduce that?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not even reintroduce, but just access those values and kind of remind our
Well,
Mhm.
it's just remembering.
Yeah, remembering.
It's they're sleeping now, but they're still there.
Yeah,
Just because something's sleeping doesn't mean they're gone. It
yeah.
just means they're sleeping.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, I wondered if there was anything else that you feel you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap up our time. And also, I wonder how can people access more of the work that you're doing? I mean, you've shared some really important pieces of how you're going about this. I mean, even just the idea of a cultural officer. I've never heard that term. I mean, I understand what that is and how you're utilizing that in your community, but I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
how can folks get in touch with the work that you're doing or learn from it? Is there any way that they can do that?
I guess there's a lot of stuff online, things that they can access that way, and there's more writings that are going on, and people come and visit the court a lot,
Yeah.
and we just talk to people, or I'll go out and talk because be invited to speak to people. I mean, I think it's mostly on each person to come up with how they're going to do it. And if they start thinking that way, then it will come back to them, you know, and you go, look at this situation. Is there an alternative to this? Yes, there is. What would it be? Let me find it. How would you not do it this way? You know, and if you start thinking of everything as interlocking responsibilities, it changes how you react to it. You know, you have a responsibility.
Yeah. Well, this has been really lovely to spend this time with you. I really appreciate it, Judge Abby. And I think we'll put some links to some of the resources that I had accessed. And as I read up on the work that you're doing, if that's okay, we'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's
Well,
not
we'll
something
share those
I
things
do
with our
well.
listeners. So if they're curious about more of the work that you're doing, they can read up on that. And then, like you said, kind of tune in for themselves, the work that they can do individually.
Yeah, they need to just think. They may think it just came upon them, but it's really in their memory.
Okay.
All right, great.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for either of these Level 2 NARM therapist trainings beginning later this spring. In this training, you will learn a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from this team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers. For more information about both upcoming trainings, please visit narmtraining.com/level2. That's narmtraining.com/level2. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.